there. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. Every Friday we sit down and chat about a case that we feel has an important message that can help others in similar situations, save a life, change mindsets, or even contribute in changing laws. But before we dive in, here's a little side note. Every bit of information, images or footage was compiled from what's available online, or if we were lucky in some cases, from the very people closest to the case. All opinions expressed are our own. We mean absolutely no disrespect. So don't click out and stay a while. Our first season, Stalking a Crime, was carefully selected because of the impact this particular crime has had on some members of our own family. Although we are covering other cases on this topic that have touched us, this season is dedicated to the Alice Ruggles Trust, as part of this year's 24 challenges in memory of Alice. We are also using our podcast as a platform to contribute in some way to getting information out to you on recognizing the signs of stalking, reporting the crime, what you can do to make a clean break from a stalker, and where you can find the help you might be desperate for. It may take one little piece of information to get someone the help they need. The Alice Ruggles Trust is taking steps to get laws changed and provide the right tools to combat this awful crime that most often goes unrecognized until serious harm occurs. Together, let's lock arms and operate under the assumption that prevention is better than cure. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Sometimes it's the little things that can reveal the most about our relationships. Clare Bernal, a 22-year-old beauty consultant from Tunbridge Wells, worked at the cosmetics counter at Harvey Nichols in Knightsbridge. She was formerly a pupil of St. Gregory's Catholic Comprehensive School in her hometown and went on to study beauty consultancy and theatre makeup at West Kent College before moving to Dulwich for her job at Harvey Nichols in 2003. Claire was a skin expert. She worked at the La Prairie beauty counter at Harvey Nichols. She loved her work. She loved looking after her customers. She's the one who sought out this job by writing directly to the brand, explaining why she loved them so much, and that letter got her through the door for an interview. She prepared herself thoroughly, and her brother accompanied her to London for the interview. He recalls later that during their trip there, Claire was practicing what she would say for her interview. She was so excited about working for La Prairie, and of course, she got the job. It is at the high-end department store that she met and began dating Michael Pech, who worked as a security guard for the store. 30-year-old Pech was an ex-soldier from Slovakia, who had moved to London on a student visa after working at the American Embassy in Bratislava. It is whilst on his student visa that Slovakia formally joined the EU, which meant that Pech now had the right to stay and work in the United Kingdom. This is when he got the job at Harvey Nichols as a security guard in 2004. However, he did not ask Claire out on a date until January 2005. The pair only had a total of 3 dates over a 3-week period before Claire called it a day on the relationship. When Pech met Claire, he was in the middle of a divorce from his wife in Slovakia. At first, Claire thought they were just casually dating and she wasn't really looking for anything serious with the man. However, he became obsessed with her after just 1 date. Claire started noticing a bunch of red flags in her new beau's behavior, and her alarm bells rang. She even told her family and relatives that she felt suffocated by her 30-year-old boyfriend, that it was all happening way too much too quickly for her taste. Patricia Bernal, Clare's mum, spoke about how Clare would phone her up to tell her how uncomfortable she was in the relationship and how Pech didn't like her seeing her friends or allow her to go home to visit. In February 2005, Pech was returning to London after a short trip home to Slovakia. He insisted for Clare to meet him at the airport, and she did, and the two went back to her flat. However, he wanted to spend the night, but Clare said no. She refused, and he wouldn't leave, saying that his luggage was too heavy to drag across London. He eventually agreed to leave on the condition that she would walk him to the train station. But at the train station, Pech refused to get on the train, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Clare. This is when she made the decision to end things for good with him. Not accepting the breakup, he followed her home as she went back to her flat. She asked him to leave, but he remained outside her home for 2 hours. When Clare's flatmate requested him to leave, he got abusive and yelled at her. Whilst he stood outside her flat, he called her 20 times. All his calls were left unanswered. The next day, he showed up again with a bunch of flowers and waited outside. She did not talk to him or accept the flowers. And at work, Pech would go out of his way to see as much of Clare as possible whilst on the job. He followed her around the store and would stare at her. He would also use mirrors within the store to keep track of her, of what she was doing, who she was talking to, where she was going. He'd also go to her counter multiple times to beg her to take him back, and insisted that he loved her and knew she loved him too. He would ask colleagues to plead for him. She only did speak to him once to tell him to stop. But that seemed to escalate the situation even more. One day, he grabbed her as she was leaving the store to tell her he loved her. That angered Clare, and she told him once and for all that she did not love him. He then shouted, "Yes, you do, you stupid little girl." Not only would he send her about 50 messages a day, he would follow her to work, getting on the same train, follow her home, and stay outside her flat for hours at a time. Seeing that Clare continued to ignore him, the tone of his text messages went from "we were meant to be together" to "I will kill myself if we can't be together, and if I can't have you, no one will." Needless to say, Clare was absolutely terrified. Her health began to deteriorate. She felt like she could not escape him. She couldn't sleep. She dreaded going to the workplace that she used to love. And at first, she was quite reluctant to report him. All she wanted was to be left alone. She didn't want him to bother her anymore. She told her mother Patricia that she was embarrassed, felt like she'd be wasting police time for reporting him because he hadn't actually physically assaulted her. But on the 30th of March 2005, when Clare was on her way home from work, she noticed Pech on the underground platform at the train station. She wanted to avoid him at all costs, so she ran down the platform and jumped on the train, but Pech had already spotted her and got on the same carriage as her. As soon as the train stopped, she immediately got off and ran, but Pech caught up to her and knocked her over. It was all too much for Clare, so she told him that if he did not stop, she'd have no choice but to report him. To which he responded, "If you report me, I will kill you." Clare quickly got onto another train and Pech banged on the window and shouted at her. She was so frightened by this that she reported him to the head of security at work. The security looked at the cameras inside the store and were able to verify that everything Clare told them was true. They then made a decision to move him to a different floor, but that did nothing to deter Pech. So the store advised Clare to go to the police and suspended Pech. During the workplace disciplinary hearing at Harvey Nichols, it further emerged that Pech had asked one of Clare's colleagues what the maximum sentence was in the UK, adding to Clare's fear of him. The store had no choice but to fire Pech, and police arrested him. But he was released on bail, without charge. Even the threat of prison did not stop Pech from showing up at her flat. Clare was so afraid that she moved flat and changed her phone number. But it took him only days to figure out her new address, and he showed up again. He was then rearrested for breach of bail condition and charged with harassment. Clare desperately tried to regain a sense of normalcy in her life and even managed to go on a holiday to Florence, Italy with her mother for her birthday in July 2005. They had a great time. Clare was never informed of his release. Pech was released on bail whilst awaiting trial, so he made his way back to Slovakia where he spent time at a shooting range. He even applied for a gun license and took the gun training and exams. After passing, he bought himself a handgun, which he registered legally with police in Slovakia, who of course had no knowledge of his arrest and impending criminal charges. He then took a coach back to the UK with the gun hidden in his luggage. His passport was never withheld whilst released on bail awaiting trial. His name was not placed on any red notice at any border security, which means that he was free to go as he pleases. 6 weeks later, he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty after his lawyer informed him that the case against him was strong. He pleaded guilty to harassment on the advice of his lawyer, so the charges in relation to threatening to kill were dropped. He was then released again on bail whilst awaiting sentencing. Clare finally said she could breathe and told her mum, "Thank God it's over. Now finally people will believe me and I can get on with my life." She truly believed that her ordeal was over. Sadly, this wasn't the case. It was 7:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the store was due to close at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, September 13th, 2005. It was fairly quiet with only few left milling about. Clare and her colleagues were busy tidying up the counter to finish their shift. Pech managed to sneak in through the back door of Harvey Nichols. High on cocaine, he approached the area where Clare was working, shot her in the back of the head, which killed her instantly, and 3 times up front, whilst panicked staff and customers ran for cover. Pech fired once more at the ceiling, then turned the gun on himself and put a bullet through his head. Michael Pech had stalked her at work, through the streets, at her home, bombarding her phone, threatening to kill her if she reported it. A brave Clare was not going to let this man continue harassing her, so she did what a lot of us don't have the courage to do. She reported it, trusting the system to protect her. After Clare's murder, it was established at the inquest that the police officer assigned to Clare's case was young with a heavy workload of approximately 25 cases to deal with, and had only had 1 day training on dealing with domestic violence. That very same officer also failed to fill out a report in relation to Pech's threat level. However, the coroner established that even if the report had been filled, Pech would still have been deemed low risk due to no prior records or convictions. Hence, police could not have predicted Clare's murder. The question still remains, why was he let out on bail? Isn't it a time when it's most critical, when a victim is most at risk? Why wasn't she informed of his bail release so she could have protected herself better? She could have been aware. Why wasn't she given more protection after he pleaded guilty? Why was he let out after pleading guilty? Yet the conclusion is that her murder could not be anticipated? I beg to differ, but what do I know? I'm only trying to look at this on a logical standpoint. And this is exactly the reason why the Alice Ruggles Trust is taking steps to get laws changed and provide the right tools to combat this awful crime that is stalking, that most often goes unrecognized until serious harm occurs. Stalking is about introducing fear in someone's life, and this crime is often committed by people you know, more often than not from former romantic partners, or one who sees themselves in a relationship with the target of their obsession. It only took one date for Michael Pech to become absolutely obsessed with Clare Bernal. Stalking may get worse or become violent over time, so don't take it lightly. Stalking crimes are either carried out in person or online, as you have seen with Michael Pech. He did it the old-fashioned way mostly. He followed her. Everywhere she went, he was there, ready to pounce. I mean, how terrifying could it be that even when you get to a train station, you are running and jumping on a train? How dangerous could that be? A stalker can instill fear in you just by clearly stating they want to harm you, as we have seen it with Claire just now. Stalking in person can include following you, waiting for you, showing up uninvited, spying on you, initiating non-consensual communication, calling you repeatedly, sending you unwanted gifts, damaging your property, and refusing to leave when you ask them to. Cyberstalking involves online harassment that uses technology such as email, social media, and other digital means of communication to commit their stalking crimes. And this is one thing that at the moment the Alice Ruggles Trust is dealing with. They have actually just recently tackled the subject of cyberstalking through a recent conference. But cyberstalking includes sending you unwanted emails, sending you inappropriate texts or DMs, which is direct messaging, harassing or threatening you on social media, tracking your computer and internet activity, tracking your location, such as putting a GPS tracker on your car, or tracking you through mobile devices, hacking into your social media and email accounts, sending you offensive, inappropriate or explicit photos or videos, stalking or harassing your family members, friends or colleagues, even if it's calling your family member or friends and pleading for them to talk on their behalf, and using online media to provoke others to attack you. They also try everything they can to try and generate some sort of a reaction from you. Stalking has become an increasing issue that we have to deal with as a society over the recent years. In the UK alone, there is over 1 million people being stalked every year. But how do we explain that only about 900 of them were put away, arrested, charged in 2018? There is obviously a massive gap in the system that we need to analyze and figure out how to solve this persistent problem. Claire took the threat against her very seriously enough to report him to the police. Seriously enough to take a further step in a bid to protect herself and reported his behavior to the bosses. This is what's recommended, to take those steps to protect yourself. I think the system has failed Claire tremendously, as it has failed so many others. As we keep seeing through the research that we make, the list of women and men, but mostly women, that keeps increasing drastically, even though we keep talking about making a change in the system and changing the laws and taking it more seriously. Someone recently asked me why we decided to launch this podcast and why we specifically chose the subject of stalking. Not only have we decided to take part in the 24 challenges for the support of the Alice Ruggles Trust in the endeavors that Alice Ruggles' family has taken to change the law and take an active commitment to helping change the system. But I also came across this quote that sums it up absolutely beautifully about how we feel. There is no monetary gain here for us. This is purely an act of humanity. This is purely because we want to show our support. This is purely because we recognize that the system needs to be changed, that any one of us can fall victim, regardless of your social status, regardless of your educational background, regardless of what country you come from and what's your cultural background. We can all be affected by this plague, because it is a plague. It's ever rising, it keeps spreading, and we are seeing countless number of victims being added to our list. At the very beginning, we decided that we were going to choose 12 cases that had an emotional impact on us, not more than the others, but that we felt quite strongly about. And the more research we make, the more victims we find year on. As we speak, there are victims of stalking. So I came across this quote that I thought summed it up beautifully as to why we decided to do this. And that quote is by M.A. Duffy. All of our lives have immense meaning and value. And when we come to really realize nothing matters but humanity, we begin to really see each other by the tragedies and the joys we all share. Our smiles and our tears are what makes us all the same. Thank you for listening. In the meantime, stay safe.